Most people think the 10 plagues of Egypt were just disasters, 10 terrible events that God unleashed to break Pharaoh's will and free the Israelites from slavery. That is the version most of us grew up hearing. But here is what almost nobody talks about. The ancient Egyptians who lived through those plagues were not confused about what was happening. They knew exactly what they were witnessing, because every single plague was a direct, targeted attack on one of their gods. This was not random devastation. This was a systematic demolition, a divine indictment issued against one of the most sophisticated religious systems the ancient world had ever produced. And God moved through it methodically, from the outer edges of Egyptian worship all the way to the very center, striking each domain of sacred power one by one until nothing was left standing. By the end of this video, you are going to see the 10 plagues in a way you never have before. Not as natural disasters that got out of hand, not as a series of escalating punishments, but as a precise, intentional dismantling of an entire pantheon, one deity at a time. This is the pattern most people miss when they read Exodus, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let us start at the beginning, because before we can understand what God was doing, we need to understand what He was doing it to. Ancient Egypt was not a primitive society with a few primitive gods. By the time Moses walked into Pharaoh's court, Egypt had over 2,000 documented deities. 2,000. These gods governed every corner of existence: the sun, the moon, the Nile, the harvest, childbirth, death, the afterlife, disease, healing, animals, and the sky itself. Egyptian religion was not something people did on holy days. It was woven into the fabric of daily life. The gods were believed to be literally present in the natural world, actively maintaining order through their divine power. The Egyptians had a word for that order. They called it Ma'at, which you can transliterate as Ma'at. Ma'at referred to cosmic truth and balance, the proper ordering of the universe. The gods upheld Ma'at. The pharaoh, as the living son of the sun god Ra and the earthly embodiment of the sky god Horus, was the human guarantor of Ma'at. His divine lineage was not a metaphor to the Egyptians. He was considered a god in human form, the bridge between heaven and earth. When Pharaoh spoke, the divine order spoke through him. This is the world Moses walked into. Not just a political empire, but a religious cosmos of enormous sophistication and deeply held conviction. And this is the context that makes every single plague so significant. When God issued the plagues, He was not simply producing chaos. He was collapsing the Egyptian worldview from the inside out, systematically exposing each of their gods as powerless in their own domain. God said it plainly in Exodus chapter 12:12. He declared that He would execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt. That is not an inference or an interpretation added later by theologians. It is a direct statement of intent from God Himself. The plagues were the execution of that sentence. And now we are going to watch it happen, one plague at a time. We can think of the 10 plagues in 3 movements, like 3 acts of a courtroom drama. The first act strikes at Egypt's most sacred physical resource. The second targets Egypt's agricultural and atmospheric sovereignty. The third delivers the final devastating blows against the supreme deities of the Egyptian cosmos. Let us walk through each one. The first plague is the turning of the Nile to blood, and you find it in Exodus 7:14 through 25. To modern readers, this sounds like an ecological catastrophe. To an ancient Egyptian, it was something far more disturbing. It was an attack on a god. The Nile was not just a river. The Nile was the source of all Egyptian life, and it was personified as a deity. Hapi was the god of the Nile's annual flood, the divine force that brought fertility to the land. Without Hapi's blessing, crops could not grow and Egypt would starve. Khnum was considered the guardian of the Nile's source, the ram-headed god who controlled the waters from their origin. The Egyptians worshipped and made offerings to these gods specifically to ensure the Nile's blessing. The river itself was sacred. When God turned the Nile to blood, he was not merely polluting a water source. He was desecrating a living deity. He was announcing to every Egyptian who understood their own religion, "This river you worship cannot protect itself." And the fact that the Egyptian magicians could initially replicate this sign with their arts did not minimize the plague. It set up what was coming. Their counterfeits were limited. God's power was not. The second plague brought frogs, recorded in Exodus chapter 8 1 through 15, and this one is brilliant in its irony. The frog was sacred in Egypt. Heket was a frog-headed goddess associated with fertility and childbirth. She was one of the deities invoked during pregnancy and labor. Frogs were not to be killed. They were to be venerated. And now they were everywhere, flooding out of the Nile, filling houses, piling into beds and bread bowls and ovens, dying in great rotting heaps that made the whole land stink. Think about the position that put the Egyptians in. They could not kill the frogs. Heket was sacred, but the frogs were smothering them. The goddess of fertility had become a curse on her own people, and she could do nothing about it. The magicians of Egypt replicated this plague too, which only made it worse. They could produce more frogs. They could not stop them. It was Pharaoh himself who had to beg Moses to intercede, saying, "Pray to your Lord to take away the frogs from me and my people." The third plague was gnats, or lice, described in Exodus 8:16 through 19. And this is where something significant shifts. The plague came from the dust of the earth, which connects it to Geb, the Egyptian god of the earth and soil. But beyond the deity connection, this plague struck at the entire Egyptian priestly system. Egyptian priests were required to maintain ritual purity to serve in the temples. They shaved their heads and their bodies. They bathed multiple times daily, all to remain ceremonially clean before the gods. Lice made that impossible. Priests were rendered ritually impure, unable to perform their temple functions. The entire apparatus of Egyptian worship was thrown into disorder. And then comes the moment that changes the entire tone of the narrative. The Egyptian magicians tried to replicate this plague, and they could not do it. They stood before Pharaoh and said, "This is the finger of God." That phrase is worth pausing on. The Hebrew word used here for finger is etzbah, a term that implies divine precision and intentional action. The magicians who had been matching Moses sign for sign were now acknowledging that what they were witnessing was categorically different from anything in their own power. This was the first crack in Egypt's spiritual confidence. Pharaoh hardened his heart anyway. And so the second movement of the divine indictment began. The fourth plague brought swarms of insects, recorded in Exodus 8:20 through 32, and scholars have often connected this to Khepri, the scarab beetle god who represented the rising sun and the cycle of creation. The scarab was one of the most iconic symbols in all of Egyptian religion. Scarab amulets were everywhere in Egyptian culture. Khepri was a solar deity associated with new beginnings and the daily rebirth of the sun. Now, swarms of these creatures were covering the land, destroying it, reducing the sacred symbol of divine renewal to a plague of devastation. Notice something important starting with this plague. God made a distinction between Egypt and the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived. The swarms did not touch Goshen. This was not coincidental, and God said it explicitly in Exodus 8:23. He was demonstrating that his authority was not a generalized force of nature. It was deliberate and discriminating. He could target whom he chose. The gods of Egypt had no such precision. The fifth plague hit Egypt's livestock with a devastating disease found in Exodus 9:1 through 7. And this was a direct assault on two of the most beloved and powerful animals in Egyptian religious life. Hathor was one of the most widely worshipped goddesses in all of Egypt, depicted with the head of a cow. She was the goddess of love, beauty, music, and joy. Apis was the sacred bull, considered a living manifestation of the god Ptah, the creator deity of Memphis. When a specific bull bearing the markings of Apis was identified, it was housed in a temple, attended by priests, and venerated as a living god. Killing it was unthinkable. God killed the livestock. Every horse, donkey, camel, ox, and sheep belonging to the Egyptians died. The sacred animals that embodied the power of Egypt's gods fell in the fields. And once again, Exodus notes, not one of the animals belonging to Israel died. God was making his point with surgical clarity. The sixth plague brought boils, described in Exodus 9:8 through 12, and this one targeted the Egyptian medical and healing tradition. Sekhmet was the goddess of healing, disease, and medicine. She was both the one who sent disease and the one who could cure it. Thoth, the god of wisdom and knowledge, was also associated with medicine and the healing arts. Isis was revered as a divine healer. These were the gods the Egyptians called upon when sickness came. Now boils broke out across every Egyptian, from the greatest to the least, and most tellingly, Exodus 9:11 tells us that the magicians could not even stand before Moses because of the boils afflicting them. The very practitioners of Egyptian sacred arts were incapacitated. The healing gods of Egypt were helpless as their own people suffered. The escalation was accelerating. The seventh plague was hail, and you find the account in Exodus 9:13 through 26. This was an assault on the Egyptian sky. Nut was the goddess of the heavens, depicted as a great arching figure spanning the sky. Shu was the god of air and atmosphere, believed to hold Nut aloft. The sky was their domain, and they were supposed to govern what fell from it. Now God sent hail mixed with fire, a supernaturally violent storm that devastated crops and broke trees and killed anything caught in the open. But notice the remarkable detail embedded in this plague. Before it began, God sent a warning through Moses. Any Egyptian who feared the word of God and brought their servants and livestock indoors would be protected. Some Egyptians obeyed, some did not. The text tells us that those who did not take the warning to heart lost everything in the fields. It is a quiet but powerful moment. Even in judgment, God was giving Egypt the opportunity to respond. Some did, most did not. The pattern of escalating hardness continued. Now we arrive at the third movement, and the plagues shift from the peripheral to the absolutely central. The eighth plague was locusts, described in Exodus 10:1 through 20. The locusts consumed everything the hail had left, stripping the land bare. Every remaining crop, every green leaf, every living plant was devoured. This attacked Osiris, the god of agriculture, the afterlife, and resurrection. In Egyptian theology, the annual growing cycle was tied to the mythological death and resurrection of Osiris. The fertility of the land was his domain. His power was supposed to ensure that Egypt would always produce. The locusts made that promise meaningless. Renenutet, the goddess of the harvest and protector of grain, was equally powerless. There was simply nothing left to protect. The ninth plague was darkness. 3 days of it. You find it in Exodus 10:21 through 23. And this plague is arguably the most theologically devastating of all the first 9 because of who it targeted. Ra was the supreme solar deity of ancient Egypt, the king of the gods, the father of creation. Aten was the solar disk itself, worshipped as the visible body of the sun. Horus, whose earthly embodiment was Pharaoh, was also a solar deity. The entire cosmological structure of Egyptian religion was centered on the sun. The daily rising of Ra was the fundamental heartbeat of Egyptian theology. It was the proof that the gods were present, that Ma'at was intact, that the cosmos was functioning. The sun going dark was not an inconvenience, it was the annihilation of the Egyptian worldview. And the darkness was not ordinary darkness. Exodus 10:21 says, "It was darkness that could be felt." The Hebrew here carries the sense of something almost tangible, a supernatural thickness. For 3 days, no Egyptian could see another person. They could not move. But Exodus 10:23 tells us that all the Israelites had light in their dwellings. The contrast was total and unmistakable. The God who governed the son of Egypt could not make it rise. The God of a nation of slaves had light for his people in the same darkness. After this plague, Pharaoh and Moses had their sharpest confrontation yet. And Pharaoh threatened Moses with death if he ever appeared before him again. The 10th and final plague was coming. The 10th plague was the death of the firstborn, found in Exodus 12:29 through 30. Every firstborn in Egypt died that night, from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon to the firstborn of the livestock. No household was exempt. No class, no status, no profession offered protection. All of Egypt woke to a sound of weeping that had never been heard before and would never be heard again. This plague struck at the very summit of the Egyptian divine order. Pharaoh, as the living son of Ra, was considered divine. His firstborn son was the heir to that divine bloodline, the next human embodiment of the gods. God took him. The divine pretension of the Egyptian royal line was exposed as exactly that, a pretension. And Osiris, the god of the dead, who was supposed to govern, number, and protect those who died, could do nothing as Egypt's households fell into mourning. The god of death had no power on the night the god of life passed through Egypt. Now step back and look at the whole picture. 10 plagues, 10 domains of Egyptian divine power. God moved from the Nile to the livestock to the sky to the sun to the royal bloodline. He moved from the peripheral to the central, from the environmental to the cosmological to the personal. By the time the 10th plague fell, every major pillar of Egyptian religious confidence had been publicly, undeniably addressed and dismantled. This is why Exodus 12:12 is the verse the entire sequence was building toward. God said, "On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord." Not a judgment, judgments plural. Each plague was a separate verdict in an ongoing trial. The divine indictment was complete, and God also told Moses in Exodus 9:16 that the purpose was not merely to break Pharaoh. He said, "I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth." This was a proclamation to every nation, to every generation, that no system of religion, no matter how elaborate or how deeply woven into human civilization, stands in the presence of the living God. There is also a detail worth sitting with about Pharaoh's hardened heart. This is a question many readers stumble over. But look at the progression. After each wave of plagues, Pharaoh had the opportunity to respond. Some Egyptians did respond. The servants who brought their livestock inside before the hail. The officials who urged Pharaoh to release Israel after the locusts, saying in Exodus 10:7, "Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" The plagues were not only judgment, they were testimony, repeated, escalating testimony, giving Egypt and the watching world every reason to recognize the God of Israel. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart was the hardening of a man who refused the testimony he was being given. And that refusal became the mechanism by which the testimony became even more comprehensive. What this pattern reveals about the character of God is significant. He is not a God who acts in generalities. He is specific. He addressed every domain of false worship, every competing claim to divine power, not with a single overwhelming act, but with a patient, deliberate, systematic process of demonstration. He gave Egypt the chance to respond at every turn. He protected his people through the entire sequence. And when it was over, not a single Egyptian deity could claim to have survived the encounter intact. The Exodus was not just a liberation story. It was a theological statement to the ancient world. The God who made the heavens and the earth was not one deity among many. He was in a category that nothing and no one else occupied. And he proved it, not by announcing it, but by dismantling the entire competition, one plague at a time. That pattern echoes all through Scripture. The same God who took on the pantheon of Egypt would later, through the prophet Elijah, take on the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18. The same God who brought darkness over Egypt for 3 days allowed darkness to fall over the land when his Son hung on a cross, proclaiming once again that no power in heaven or earth operates outside his sovereignty. The Apostle Paul, writing in Colossians 2:15, would describe the cross as God disarming the powers and authorities, making a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them. The language is the same language as the Exodus. God putting false power on public display and showing it for what it is. The plagues of Egypt were not a random disaster. They were a divine courtroom proceeding, conducted in the open, with the whole ancient world watching. And the verdict was clear. I am the Lord. If this is the first time you have seen the Exodus story through this lens, I hope it has changed the way you read those familiar chapters. Every plague has a name it was aimed at. Every judgment had a purpose behind it. And the God who issued that indictment is the same God who invites us, even now, to trust that he holds all things. Father, thank you that you are not one power among many, but the Lord over every claim that competes with your authority. Give us eyes to see the Exodus not as a story from the ancient past, but as a living declaration of who you are, the God who dismantles every false hope and proves himself faithful to his people in every generation. Amen.